Hello, I'm Shane Bergin. I'm a physicist and I'm really interested in how people learn.
And I'm Jane Chadwick. I'm a dormant volcanologist and I'm also really interested in how people learn, especially because I have a child at the moment and I'm watching her go through all of this stuff. This is 101. It's a show about the way we learn and it looks at lots of different aspects of learning, which allows us to kind of get into how the brain works, how it takes in information, how it stores information, how it retrieves information, and kind of all the nitty-gritties that go into that. And really we're following people as they learn something new.
Yeah, and in this episode, a PhD student and teacher, Sinead Burke from Trinity College Dublin, is being taught the craft of perfumery by a specialist, Marija Aslimoska, in a perfume shop in the middle of Dublin here in Ireland. And we'll also hear from Professor Shane O'Mara, and he is Professor of Experimental Brain Science. What a cool title, in Trinity College Dublin. So here's what happened when Sinead learned how to make perfume.
I'm Sinead Burke and I am a PhD candidate in Trinity College in Dublin, but simultaneously I have an infatuation and obsession with fashion and beauty and fragrance, and I have a website called Mini Melange.
I am Marija Aslimoska. I am a classically trained perfumer who has come to Ireland and opened a perfume shop called Perfumeria, which is in the Westbury Mall.
I was really fascinated there. You said that you were a classically trained perfumer. Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
Well, that means in the world there's two schools that you can actually apply and get either rejected or accepted into their program. And these two schools are in France. And one of them is outside of Versailles and the second one is in Grasse, which is in the south of France. And it is a historic place where perfume does come from. So to be classically trained is really by having a team of people who have been doing this for years, and among them some of the best perfumers in the world.
Like, what is that process like? What is that? I'm a teacher by trade, so I'm fascinated by the education of that. Like, what does it involve?
Well, what it involved, it was really coming every morning with the dawn in the school, and the first thing we did every single morning without exception was having a test. So as soon as you wake up your eyes and you come into your chair at the school, the first thing you were handed over were 10 strips with a no name on it, and you had to say what is it on them. And every day there were different ingredients. So this is how we started the day. And then we would have a very intensive teaching in learning all of the natural ingredients which are used in perfumery and the synthetic ones. These were the mornings, and then in the afternoons we would have teachers from different backgrounds, the likes of chemistry, which is important. It's an important subject to know when you're making a perfume. We had history of fragrance, perfumers who were teaching us especially on creation and formulation of the fragrances. So these were for the afternoons. So very, very intensive, about 12 hours a day of constantly learning and, yes, being observed.
I suppose fragrance was my first entrance into the fashion domain. Mm-hmm. And that probably came from an accessibility from a price point of view. Mm-hmm. I wasn't really interested in lipstick or makeup. Fragrance was my entry level. And since the time I was maybe 16 or 17, I wore Chanel Coco Mademoiselle. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure what it was about it, but I loved the floral nature and the sweetness, and probably at the time thought that it narrated my own personality, though few would say I'm sweet. But as I've kind of gotten older, I've really changed. Mm-hmm. So I had Thierry Mugler Angel, which is very different. It's much more dramatic and darker tones, and was one of those fragrances that I would put it on, and I'm terrible. You're supposed to spray it, I believe, into your sweat points so that it kind of emanates from you, whereas I wouldn't. I would just spray it in front of me and then walk through. So everybody knew. Yeah, I know. And I used to work it out. I think it's €1 a spray for Chanel Coco Demoiselle. So I was a terrible, terrible person, and my house always smelled radically. And I started that and I liked it for a while, and I still have some left. And it depends on my mood and my humour. At the moment I'm going between Jo Malone's Pomegranate Noir, and then I have a Miu Miu fragrance that is much sweeter and lighter. So I think it depends on whether or not I want to be extroverted or introverted.
Okay, I have to say I was there at 16 at the same point that you were. I was actually wearing Coco Mademoiselle as well. It's a wonderful fragrance as well. I think as you're growing up, you really do admire Chanel. And again, it's the only entry level, perhaps at 16, that you would have is to buy their fragrance or some piece of makeup, because their clothing and their handbag and accessories are probably way out of our budget at that point.
We have this beautiful cabinet at home where we stock all of our fragrances, and they're all unique to each one of us, and they still sit in our window even though some of the bottles are empty. So they've kind of become collector items, but also gateways into our teenage years. And we have old fragrances from like the 1970s and 1980s by Worth, who was one of the very first couturiers. And for me, as somebody who's interested in fashion, I didn't know that Worth had a perfume house alongside the couture house. So we don't use them because the Worth fragrance smells like something my grandmother would wear. And there's a market for that, but it's not me.
I would put them in the fridge, first of all. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because with time, fragrances do disintegrate.
Yes, absolutely.
Slowly, especially the top notes, which are very volatile, and it preserves them much better. They have to be in a dark and a cold place. I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned Angel. Now, Angel is a very, very, very particular fragrance. It had its own heyday, which was probably in the late 90s. Not so much now, but people who used to wear it in the 90s are still very loyal to it. So I just wanted to know, are you wearing it these days?
Yeah, I still have it on that cabinet, and every now and again I would remember that it's there and go, oh, I really liked that, and spray it on. But it would have to be a very particular type of occasion. I think it's if I'm ever feeling not so confident, I put Angel on. And on days when I'm not feeling so great, that's the one that I definitely reach for, because it gives me additional confidence.
It's a fragrance that, as I said, you need a big personality to wear it, because it's an overdose of so many ingredients, and one of the main 3 ingredients in this perfume is pineapple, burnt sugar note, which is called maltol, and a huge overdose of patchouli. And this whole fragrance has actually only 24 ingredients, that's all. But it's a classic. So anyway, you like this fragrance and you like Coco Mademoiselle, which is again a fragrance that has a lot of patchouli and a lot of mandarin on top. So what I'm kind of realizing, along with pomegranate noir, is that you actually would love a fragrance that has a patchouli in the base. So if you were to come in Perfumery and you told me, I like Coco Mademoiselle, I like Angel, and I like pomegranate noir, I have you sorted.
Wow. When I was younger, if Beyonce released a fragrance, I was immediately some way snobby and was like, oh, well, I'm not going to buy that because that's a certain price point. But actually, when I got older, I learned that it's the same nose who works in many of the big perfumeries, who works on, say, maybe Coco Mademoiselle, that will also support the development of a celebrity fragrance. Is that true?
It is true, but not in this particular example as you gave, because Chanel has an in-house perfumer that would create only for Chanel. There is few houses, but now it's the trend, so more houses are starting to do the same. Chanel, Dior, Hermes, they actually have an in-house perfumer who creates exclusively for the house. However, we're speaking about brands, I'm just going to be naming several now, Stella McCartney, Tom Ford, Yves Saint Laurent, Givenchy. They actually have no in-house perfumers. They're actually owned by a big corporate company that gives a brief to one of these perfumers who actually one day could be making a perfume for Paris Hilton, and then the next day they're making the next, I don't know, Marc Jacobs.
Where do I go to tune my nose and to learn more, except just randomly picking up a bottle in a store and going, oh, I think this smells nice?
Well, you know, the thing is that this has changed up until recently. I would say perhaps in the last 7-8 years, the world of fragrance was very closed. Of course, there's no books that you can actually go and read. There's no podcasts on perfume making. There would be very few. Yes, there was Perfume the book, but this is a fantasy. Yes. It's not the real life, and it's a very closed world altogether. So this is not the case anymore, because as we're seeing, if you go online, you have several several blogs like Fragrantica and Base Notes, and you can spend hours learning about notes and what these fragrances smell like, and people have a very excellent vocabulary. And even though perhaps you've never smelled something, by the way they describe it, all of a sudden you're there and you can imagine it in your head.
If you're a 16-year-old young woman or young man listening to this, and you have just sprayed Coco Mademoiselle on yourself but want to learn more, where should you go?
There is a wonderful book on, it's called The Secret of Chanel No. 5, which actually explains most of the fragrance about Chanel fragrances in particular.
It was 5 bottles, wasn't there? Didn't the perfumer create 5 different fragrances and she picked number 5?
Yes, so she also counted that 5 is her lucky number.
Yes.
And everything about, I mean, the story is really fascinating, and this is why this fragrance will be a classic, has been, and it will stay that way for a long time.
I remember prior to actually smelling number 5, I'd heard so much about the story and had seen the campaigns, and it was the fragrance, at least when the time when I was growing up in the late 1990s. And I remember passing through the airport and seeing it and thinking, I'll just go and see what it smells like. And I remember it being very different to what I had envisioned it to be in my mind. And I think that comes from the storytelling aspect. When you're creating fragrances for people here, it's more than just for their personality or for the various other fragrances that they like. How do you tell a story with Mandarin?
Well, it's funny you're asking that, because I actually would like to show you a fragrance that I have created. It's called Actress, and this fragrance was created for a fashion house from Macedonia. I'm originally from Macedonia, and we have a fashion house there called Kokev, and I was commissioned to create her first fragrance. And so she gave me a brief, and the brief was Actress. What does an actress smell like? So as I was creating this fragrance in my lab, I had, at that point in my life, I was really fascinated with Eva Green. I absolutely love her beauty. Yes, and she is that actress, but she has this dark side as well. So I'm not fond of actresses who are very pleasing with the way they look and the way they sound. I want them to have a little bit something dark. So Eva Green was my choice. So as I was creating this fragrance, I was imagining that it will be her wearing it. This is the image. We all have seen the pictures of them on the red carpet, right? And I had Eva Green in Cannes Film Festival on this red carpet. So the first thing you see is that their big smile, and you feel warm inside because they smile at you, and you feel important in that millisecond that you think they're smiling at you.
They've gifted you with their presence.
Yes. And then you have these diamonds, because they're usually, drowned in diamonds. And so you have this little reflection at the same time. And then she's wearing perhaps a really long black velvet dress. So when I was thinking about all of this, I tried to translate it with ingredients. So for her smile, for this really warm warmth that she gives you, I did put the notes of mandarin, because lemon is a bit too cold of a citrus, and then orange was a bit too no. So for me, mandarin was something in between that had enough character, but it was still that warm, nice feeling. But then you have this sharpness also, and these diamonds and the reflection, and that for me was something cold. So I added notes of pink pepper, which is a cold spice. So as you're smelling it, you have this mandarin and pink pepper, and all of a sudden it's that mixture. And then for me, she would be like a rose, like a beautiful, beautiful rose. And I'm not talking about those roses that have petals that don't know what they are, but the roses that have really thick, as I would say, velvety petals. So I wanted to create a fragrance that had this texture. So I use notes of rose, of course, but then she still has this sweetness, right? She's very, very, very well trained how to speak, and so when you're talking to her, you may even fall in love. There's a
meekness there to her.
So I added notes of an ingredient called tolu balsam, which is very sweet. It's almost like syrupy. But, as I said, she has dark side, so I wanted to put these notes of her dark side into the fragrance. So I added notes of something that smells to me like thorns, which smells like a really burnt leather and sharp. So as you're smelling this sweetness, and I actually have the fragrance, I can let you smell it now. As you're smelling this sweetness, in the background, just like when we're watching a film, you actually know that even though it's a beautiful scene, you're expecting that something is going to happen which is not supposed to happen.
You start hearing the shrieking violins underneath.
Somehow, you know, and this is why I actually wanted to add this moment of drama to the fragrance and add these notes of this, as I said, it's a burnt green note that reminds of leather. But in all this sweetness, all of a sudden it starts revealing, you know, and then in the base, I also added notes again. So I was thinking about her personality, about the way she looks. And if you sit, as we were learning the ingredients every morning in France, this would be the thing, that each ingredient has so many different facets. So if we're even talking about, let's talk about lemon. It's not just citrus. When you smell lemon, in fact, it has a nice sweetness in it. It's like it's like a coating of sugar. It has like a sorbet part to it. Then it's green. It actually has also even a floral part. So once you actually really immerse yourself into the smell, you start getting all of these different parts, and then you can imagine in what color actually I always bond a sense with either people I know or places I've been, or a color. So you kind of store it in your mind under a different color, or it smells like the house of my friend, or it's you know, this is completely Martina.
Yeah,
you know, that
you have
kind
this huge database. But you're doing it to meet a brief, and the person who you're giving it to maybe hasn't had the same thought process as you. Is there a nervousness there when you hand it over, actress, and we're like, I really hope this is it?
Absolutely. And you know what? We sell it here in Perfumeria, and it's a fragrance I never show. It's just because of this, again, aspect that you're never sure. You know, I think once you've created something, you feel very protective over it and very self-conscious about it.
It makes you vulnerable. Okay, so we're getting to the instructional bit where I have to do a bit of work.
Yeah.
So what are you going to teach me?
So first of all, I want you to close your eyes.
Oh.
I want you to see which bottle I'm actually taking.
Okay.
I would like you to guess what is it here that you're smelling.
Oh no.
Okay, so this is going to test you really. It is something from our everyday life. I'm not giving you something very...
Something from my everyday life. Okay.
Yeah. Here it
Now
is.
this just makes it worse if I get it wrong. Okay, it smells quite fresh. It smells quite earthy, but I could be totally off the wrong mark. Okay, is it lemon?
Okay, you're getting closer. This is warmer, so fresh, kind of
Earthy.
like a lemony, earthy.
Is it lemongrass? That's
No.
not every day. I have notions about myself now.
Keep the earthy part
Okay.
is important. Think about something in the earth, roots.
Grass, weeds, no. Florals.
No, and the citrus. And
And the
are you getting a
citrus.
bit of a spiciness there?
Yes, it's not pink pepper.
No.
Because I've only just learned about that. A spiciness that has a citrusy lemon flavour. There will be people listening to this now shouting at me with their answers, and they know and they're confident, and I'm sitting here going,
Okay, I just have to tell you.
Do.
It is ginger.
Ginger. Well, I wouldn't have got that.
No,
In any way.
but a lot of people get thrown off the
Yeah.
what really it is, just because they smell the citrusy part. So then you're searching in your head for citrusy smells, but it still doesn't match.
So is this an organic or synthetic?
No, this is a natural
Okay.
ginger oil, what you're smelling. With oils, they have to be distilled. So you would have to have actually the right equipment to be putting ginger roots.
Yes.
And to then distill it with the steam. And then whatever separates, one part of it would go as a steam and evaporate forever. But there is part of it that would be dripping drop by drop into a small vial, which is the oil.
Yeah.
And you would have to you will have to use a big quantity of ginger roots to actually just get a small drop of oil.
And that must make then the oil quite expensive.
That makes the oil quite expensive. Now, not all ingredients, not all natural ingredients are very expensive. Just because, let's say, ginger, for instance, there's plenty of ginger in the world. But if we're speaking about jasmine, now that's a different story.
Absolutely.
So it's very particular to very few areas in the world that would actually grow jasmine. So we're talking about a very limited amount of supply that you could have. It's the same with sandalwood or narcissus or violet leaves. So these are very particularly expensive ingredients. Rose, very expensive because of all the 400 different types of roses that exist in the world. We actually use only 2. And so they're the only 2 that are actually any good for perfume. The rest of them are not. And as a perfumer, you actually learn to cheat. With all of the ingredients, you actually, as I said, you're creating a library. And sometimes you could be in a very big hurry, or somebody hands you over a strip and says, "What's this?" And it could be ginger, something so simple. But you have to search in your head, where exactly is this scent, where have I stored it, and then to say what it is. So if you create a little links, liaisons of what does it remind you of. But this is why when somebody comes into the shop and says, for something that is citrusy, and says, "Oh, this smells very woody," I never say this is wrong, because your life experiences have been completely different to mine. And perhaps maybe you were in a forest with, citrusy, whatever ingredients in the air. And for you, that moment is forever captured like that in your head. And just because I know there is no woods in it, who am I to say that you're wrong?
Off the top of your head, how many fragrances are in that database that you have?
So, I mean, it's the fragrances is a separate folder altogether, but the ingredients, the raw ingredients that do make the fragrances, this is where you have to build up your library. So we're talking about a library of about 3,000 scents, and this combines natural ingredients, synthetic ingredients, and then we do also have a small portion of the ingredients which are semi-synthetics. They've been derived from natural ingredients.
And as a teacher, I'm fascinated. How do you begin that process of learning those 3,000? Like, do you write them down? This is me asking what type of learner you are, because I'm trying to figure out how you map that. I mean, we struggle with the Leaving Cert.
So, to make it more systematic, we have divided them either in animalic notes, balsamic notes, woody notes, citronella notes, spicy notes. So as soon as you smell something, you have to know in which family it goes.
Absolutely.
Second, which you have to learn about your ingredients, which actually is not something that you can be taught. You actually have to spend the time with the ingredient, just you and the strip, and put it on a strip and then observe it. So this is what we would do. We would dip these strips into the oils and then follow their evolution on the strip throughout the day.
Okay.
So this requires a lot of time.
Absolutely.
And so you have to know, for instance, ingredients like the citrusy notes or the green notes or the fruity notes, they're really only top notes, and they last anything from 1 minute to 15 minutes. After that, there is nothing left in the strip. So we would sit, and with time as it's passing by, we would be actually writing through the evolution of this ingredient, how it smelled at the beginning, in 2 hours, in 4 hours, was a strip empty by the 5th hour or the 5th and a half. So you're learning about the longevity of the ingredient naturally in the air.
How do you take a break? Because I imagine if you're going from juniper berry to, pepper, you need something to cleanse it.
The best way to do so, and what we do here, is fresh air.
Okay.
A second way, which is a more effective way for, let's say, if you're in a big department store and smelling something and you do not have access to fresh air, is perhaps coffee beans. And so you could smell the coffee beans.
I have them here.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear them? So they're very strong.
Yeah, they're very strong, but they somehow neutralize whatever you've been smelling up to that point, and they give you a not so clean and fresh palette, but they will give you a distinction between what you smelled last and what you're smelling next. So you have your ginger strip there, and you were saying that it smells like lemon. Mm. So to give you the distinction, because they're quite similar, you're right in the way they smell. Now, again, another way of... It's by comparing them straight one after the other.
Oh, wow.
So that's what lemon smells like. And
it's much breezier and airier than I thought it would be.
But do you get the sugary coating?
Yeah, you
inside?
do. It feels like icing sugar on the top of it.
Exactly.
But it feels so warm. And there's still a sharpness to it, like what we were talking about earlier in comparison to the Mandarin. But it does feel like you're on holiday.
But if I were to create a fragrance, and let's say for financial reasons I want to use a cheaper ingredient, I would not bother about orange because it's so cheap. I would just use the normal orange. Where? Now a different story goes completely for an ingredient called sandalwood.
Yes.
Okay, so sandalwood is an ingredient that you need a trunk of a tree old about 80 years old, and then we take the heart of the tree, and then this is distilled, and then we get the sandalwood oil. What does this mean? The sustainability is impossible. The number of humans on this planet is constantly rising, and we are against time. So you need something that grows in 80 years to be able to crop it. So even if I cropped it today and I planted it myself today, it will not be my children. It might be my grandchildren or their children who actually are ready to crop it. But again, us humans being clever the way we are, we have created about maybe at least another 15 different sandalwood synthetic notes that smell very much and behave very much like sandalwood oil itself, but are not the real deal.
And what's the advantage then of having the real deal?
I will show you another ingredient just to understand this. So smell this. This is stuff made in heaven, if you ask me.
Wow.
It's an ingredient called tonka bean. Grows mostly in South America.
There's a hint of like earthiness, absolutely. But there's a sweetness to the edges of it that kind of feels creamy.
Exactly. So it's very sweet.
Yeah.
And the main note, which you said everything you were supposed to say, but the one main note is it smells almondy.
Yeah.
So this absolutely is actually, it would cost you anything between 4,000 to 6,000 euro per kilo.
I should be very careful with this.
So let's say if you really wanted to put tonka bean note in your fragrance, but you could not afford a 4,000 to 6,000 euros, we have an ingredient called coumarin, which I'm going to find now. Okay, and I would like you to smell this now. So this is about €4 a kilo.
That one I can do.
Now this is a big difference when compounding a formula and creating something either for a client or for yourself.
Okay.
You see, it smells almondy. It has the buttery part. It has the sweetness.
It does.
But what is missing?
It's the texture.
Exactly.
It's
very linear.
Absolutely.
It's one-dimensional. I'll show you here. We have in perfumery something called gas chromatography.
Oh.
And this allows us to analyze any smell.
Okay.
And it then recognizes if there is molecules that us humans have recognized and found out in the past. It will tell us which molecules it has. So this is of only rose oil. Okay. It's a gas chromatography of only rose oil.
Wow.
It's not a perfume. It's only one single ingredient.
Okay.
And the machine goes on and on and on here, and recognizes 118 ingredients, which what it really means is 118 molecules. Wow. Okay, but we're having all of this, right? So you're having this against coumarin, which is only one molecule.
Wow.
So this is where this diversity in smell comes with the natural ingredient, and why the synthetics cannot really compare it.
Marija, you were telling me so much about Actress and Eva Green, and I can't leave here today without getting a whiff of it. Do you mind if I...
Sure.
Okay. High expectations. Wow. Okay. It's in a gorgeous bottle. Did you get to choose the bottle?
No, it's the client.
Wow. It's lovely and light. And when we were discussing all of those ingredients and so many of them and the various different molecules, and that you kind of expect, you just assume that it's going to be a really full and overpowering scent, but it's beautiful and light, and you can get the citrus notes.
Remember I was telling you there's tolu balsam, the sweetness? Are you getting that?
I am. Wow.
And if you were to wait, I said that kind of almost a sinister moment. It will start coming.
You should be really proud to talk about it. It's extraordinary.
Thank you.
But it has been an amazing day.
Thank you.
I have learned so much. And I think what I've learned most today is how perfume should be respected more.
I wish radio had an ability for us to smell, because that sounded absolutely amazing.
No, I didn't even know you could do this. This is cool.
I know, and me neither. Like, who knew you could do that in the middle of Dublin? What I thought was absolutely amazing was, it was something completely unexpected. I imagined it would have been much more sort of 2 drops of this and 1 drop of that, and
a
you
recipe.
get a recipe. Thank you, but it was far more linked to telling a story, wasn't it? And like the role of building up this narrative, and that you would associate smells with situations or life experience, and so you evoke rather than just mix.
Yeah, and I guess when you think about it, it makes some sense, right? Because, you know, all it takes is a smell of, you know, like for me, I'm just totally North American here, apple pie, or bringing you back to a memory of your childhood, or, you know, a certain smell can evoke all sorts of memories. So it makes sense that you could use smell in that kind of storytelling way, and that by combining those things, you can combine this sort of new evocative thing that perfectly suits a certain situation or a certain person.
Yeah, I thought that's really true. And like that learning is a very sort of contextualized experience, right? So when we would think about learning something for the first time, we always remember where we were, or who we were with, and what was going on around us. You don't think, I just learned my 2 times tables. I have this image of sitting on a seat and having to like rhyme through them from my mum, who was like, let's just get through this.
Absolutely,
you know.
Yeah.
And
I have the exact same memory, except I'm sitting on a kitchen counter. Weird.
Yeah, so like the context is everything, right? So I guess Marija here, who's an expert with perfume, she is using that context for her teaching, so that Sinead is learning about how do you build context through smell. So while memory is like super important in education, it's not the be all and end all, right? And this is always the classic conundrum, that just knowing something in your head doesn't like often you can't do anything with it. It's not contextualized.
It's information, not knowledge.
And so it's something you've acquired, as opposed to something that you have a deep understanding of and that you can apply and use. And it's a criticism that's often thrown at education systems, right? When you think like you can learn an incredible amount of complex maths, but you can't figure out a simple problem. So, and that isn't to blame a student. It's more pointing at the system that allows a student arrive at that point. And so, like, I think there must be something more to this perfume episode than just remembering a smell, right? It seems like it's richer than that. Absolutely.
And I think you know, you hear a little bit of it in Marija's kind of discussion of how she was trained. You know, it sounds intense. She had to, you know, learn this back catalogue of thousands of smells, and she talks about how you do that by breaking it down into these different, this different framework. You know, these different notes that she talks about. So it gives her kind of a sense, a framework to work within, a context to work within, how she actually brings all that information and makes it useful for her to apply in actually putting together these perfumes. So she has all of this information which she can store in her memory because she's got this framework, but then she can retrieve it and actually use it in a useful way because she has this sort of applied experiential use for it. You know, she's got this kind of
she's lived it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like the difference between knowing all the words and being able to write, isn't it? Because like you might know all the words, but maybe you don't have the ability to string them together to tell a story, and for that story to have depth
and meaning.
And meaning, and so that it would touch somebody else, and that it's meaningful for you to write it. And that struck me as the secret ingredient in this situation here. Absolutely, it wasn't just here's a big suite of smells that you can learn, but it's how do you use those to tell a story?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of the difference between, you know, it struck me when the teacher was speaking about all these different catalogue of smells. Well, surely, you know, you can have a database of that, and, you know, like a kind of thesaurus of smells, and then surely, you know, a computer could put together a perfectly, you know, decent perfume, but they won't have that. Well, at least not yet. It wouldn't have that kind of human element, that narrative of how these certain things play together and kind of what that means in terms of having a meaning or a kind of a background to the scent.
This is a huge issue in education at the moment, is that knowledge is not something that's just acquired, but it's something that's useful in the world. And so it's often where the limits of artificial intelligence are seen, and that the computer might have all the information inside it, but it doesn't know where to begin with it because it isn't an emotional sentient being that is...
Not yet.
No. Oh God, if our computer overlords are listening to this. But there is that barrier that even a young person who may not have an awful lot of experience of life can know when the situation is right or not so right, and they can be far more intelligent, to use that word deliberately, than a machine would be, or smart, right? I actually don't like the term smartphone because my phone isn't really that smart.
I don't know. They can do a lot. No, but I joking aside, I do know what you mean there. I think that what we're getting at is really that learning is about meaning. It's about kind of assigning an importance and an application for information. That's kind of where this kind of boils down to, which is a really interesting place to end up in from talking about perfume. It
is, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you think about it, for school, it's where is the meaning, right? And the need for us to search for that in school systems too, and that when we go to learn formally, it isn't just about acquiring information and saying I know that, but it is also about looking for the meaning.
Yeah, and looking for where it fits in the world in context, which is really, really interesting too. Yeah,
so that this is one of my favourite quotes, so that the output of good education should be more education, is in that your mind is opened and you've a hunger to do even more in that area, as opposed to going, I've ticked that box now.
That's done. Yeah, well, definitely this has made me want to go out and sign up to a perfume class. I was like you, I really just wanted to go and smell all those smells and really kind of get stuck into it, which is cool. So I'm a volcanologist, geochemist by training, and Shane, you're a physicist. So we really needed to wear that badge of honor with pride. So we really needed to get some expert advice. So we spoke to Shane O'Mara, who was able to kind of get into the nitty gritties of memory and how that works, and how scent might be linked in with that into triggering memory. Yeah,
he's a professor of experimental brain science in Trinity College Dublin, which must be one of the coolest academic job titles there is going.
Definitely. So if he can't give us useful information, nobody can. But anyway, let's see what he has to say.
I'm Shane O'Mara. I'm Professor of Experimental Brain Research and a Wellcome Trust Senior Investigator at the Institute of Neuroscience, Trinity College Dublin. So we've learned a lot about memory and how the brain stores memories over the past couple of decades. The first general remark to make is that memories are not stored like a videotape. It is not the case that we can recall things that have happened to us in exactly a picture-like format. Instead, what we do is we recall the gist of what has happened to us. We are very good at recalling events such as what we've been doing over the past few days, past few weeks, and those kinds of things. And we can articulate that information, and that information, or that type of memory, is referred to sometimes as a declarative memory. What we know is that there is a specialized brain region called the hippocampal formation, which is involved in supporting that kind of memory. And if you interrupt the functions of the hippocampal formation through disease, such as Alzheimer's disease, or through stress, or through trauma, through, for example, a head injury, memory becomes very, very impaired as a result. We also have a separate memory system in the brain, which is concerned with a whole class of implicit memories. These are memories that are difficult to articulate, like how you swing a golf club, how you play the piano, how you shape your hand in order to pick up your coffee cup, or whatever it happens to be. And this type of memory depends on an elaborate brain system which is independent of the hippocampal formation. At a lower level, what we know is that memories require modification of the activities or the activity between individual brain cells. There's an old slogan in neuroscience which says that cells that fire together wire together, and this is at the core of what happens in memories. We know that brain cells, in order to store memories, must be active together, and in the event that they're not, those memories are lost. So, smell and memory is something that people have long suspected is intimately involved. And actually, the structure of the brain gives us a good reason for suspecting that might be the case. It turns out that the olfactory bulbs, the part of the brain that's involved in smell, is immediately adjacent to the part of the brain that's involved in memory, namely the hippocampal formation. And the olfactory bulbs, just like many other senses, send information directly and indirectly to the hippocampal formation. And it is through this set of connections that memory for smells are supported in the brain. If it was the case, for example, that you were to interrupt the connection between the olfactory bulbs and the hippocampal formation, your memory for what smells are would disappear. We know as well that there are people who have exceptional noses. They are very good at discriminating different types of smells. Now, being able to discriminate between odours is not the same thing as being able to learn the name that goes with those odours or the properties of those odours. So there's two different processes here. One is telling the difference between two smells, and the second is having a list in your head of the properties of that smell. And in this case, knowing what's associated with the smell proceeds exactly the same way in terms of learning any other item of information. It's a simple associational process, much like learning the name of a face or learning the name of an object or anything else like that.
So now let's talk about Sinead as a learner. I think this is a really, really interesting one because Sinead is a teacher. So and you can hear it. You can hear how aware she is of learning all the way through. You know, she's kind of breaking it down and working through it. And she's so aware of her thinking the whole way through. Yeah,
she's incredibly metacognitive. She's so aware of her own thinking. And that must help her so much when she's learning new things, because she is not afraid at all to kind of reflect and to stop every so often and to tell her teacher where she is with that, and for her not to be afraid to say, oh, I don't get this, or I do get that, or do you think that means? So she's always pushing. Yeah. Like, she must be an incredible teacher as well. Yeah, well, you would expect with those kind of skills. Although you do hear her, you know, even Sinead, who seems to be she's a fantastic learner and a great teacher. You can hear her being a little bit anxious about being put on the spot with the smells, which I'm sure, yeah, it is tricky. You know, she's anxious about getting the right answer. Oh, she got one of them wrong and she's like, okay, so, and just moves on completely. But like that whole ability to be self-aware in your learning has been shown to be more effective than anything else in improving our own learning. It's more effective than the size of the class. It's more effective than, well, certainly things like streaming, which are actually detrimental. But that metacognition is said to be the most powerful thing that a teacher can do with his or her students to increase their ability to learn. So just increasing their ability to be aware of how they're learning and what they're learning, and, you know, kind of reflecting on what they're doing. Yeah, they're really aware of the ways that they themselves learn and their sense of self, and that's incredibly complex because of their own relationship to the world around them and the people in their lives. And that tool is incredibly powerful. So yeah, so a really interesting thing that came up in this piece is that you can hear Marija talking about how she's not the super smeller. She's not like she hasn't got this superhuman sense, but that she actually has a vocabulary to describe the things that she can smell. So she's able to pick up on all sorts of different things that, you know, even if you can smell them, if you don't have the language to describe them, then you're kind of at a disadvantage there. And I think that's a really interesting thing to think about when you're thinking about learning, because that's a huge part of it, the communication aspect and actually being able to put your finger on something, to having a vocabulary. And it's also the importance of a teacher being expert, right? That you know, if you're going to be taught how to use perfume, you need a perfumier to come and be your expert. And that her vocabulary comes from years of practice and developing habits of mind in that area. So she does this really fluently. She's got this amazing and intense classical training. Yeah, you know, and so there is worth to your science teacher being a scientist, or your volcanology teacher being a volcanologist even, because you need that depth, that language, that experience to like bring the students towards that subject.
So thank you so much for listening. We had so much fun hearing from Shane and from Sinead and from Marija. I know I really enjoyed it. And you can find us, if you've enjoyed it too, you can find us in lots of places. We're on 101 The Podcast on social media. We're also at 101thepodcast.com. And you can also find us on any platform that you find your podcasts by searching for 101 The Ways We Learn.
But we'd also like to ask you a little favour. If you enjoyed this show, it would be really great if you could review us on iTunes or wherever you catch your podcasts, because then other people get to find out about us. They get to learn too. So please spread the word. Thank you. We've been Shane Bergin and Jane Chadwick. 101 is produced by Bureau and is supported by Science Foundation Ireland.
Hi, I'm Margie McCarthy. I'm the Head of Education and Public Engagement with Science Foundation Ireland, and we're really happy to support 101 because there's a science behind everything and there's a science behind learning as well.